You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I'm Sherry Lip, the marketing manager at Stimulus Technologies, and I'm here today with Stimulus Technology CEO Nathan Whitaker, and we are going to be talking about the Internet of Things. Hello, Nathan.
Hey, Sherry. Thanks for everybody joining us today.
So we talked about this a couple of years ago already, and first, do you have a favorite smart device, an internet device, and what do you think has changed in the past 2 years?
So, I think there's more and more things that want to be connected to the internet. I actually just this morning got a new fridge delivered to the house, and it's not an expensive fridge or a fancy fridge, just a basic, uh, you know, basic fridge that any kitchen should have. And, the first thing it says, connect me to the internet. And I have no idea why I'd want to connect my fridge to the internet. And it's interesting how many devices now, for whatever reason, want to connect to the internet. So I think we first need to define what IoT or Internet of Things means for personal and for business. We've certainly seen a big growth in personal IoT, which is devices like my fridge that want to be connected to the internet. And this isn't a fancy fridge; it doesn't have a screen on it, or there's nothing you know nothing that I would use the internet for on this device. It just wants to get connected, and so there are certainly a lot of things in our personal lives, whether it's an Alexa, home device, or an Apple Watch, or something, my car, when I pull into the garage, connects to the internet for updates and things like that. So, there's so many devices now that connect to the internet to communicate, send alerts. They download updates. They communicate with our cell phones. And there's just so much communication, and it's great because we can gather all that information on all these devices that we use in our lives into one place, or through the internet. But it does lead to a lot of problems. And then the next thing is in our businesses, there are a lot of IoT devices now, especially in things like manufacturing, monitoring equipment and machines, maybe in engineering, production, things like that, that there's a lot of IoT. But then I think in the office, we have to deal with, if you have people coming into your office that they want to connect their Apple Watch or their speaker or something to the office network, and you have to create a strategy around that. So I think that's what we're going to get into today.
Yes. So what what do you think that businesses need to be aware of most when it comes to these devices?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the security side of these IoT devices. There's certainly been some historical incidences of IoT devices being connected onto a business network that have led to hacking incidences. And so it's and you just don't you cannot trust every one of these devices. So um we'll get into the podcast, thinking about that. What's the security, and how do you segregate these devices off to prevent them from attacking your network or leading to a security breach. The other thing is in the past, we've worried a little bit about bandwidth at the office. um, Bandwidth has increased dramatically over time, but there is still concern about all these devices consuming up a lot of bandwidth and not adding to the productivity of the employees. And so they become a distraction, or they're not helpful to office work. And so it's a concern that all these devices connecting to the network can cause an IT nightmare, whether it's bandwidth or security or other things you have to worry about.
So when it comes to bandwidth, how much are these taking up, and what should businesses be aware of when they're, because we just connect everything and just assume it's fine.
Well, from a bandwidth perspective, if it's just minimal communication, like if you have a device on let's say you have a press, like you're a manufacturing facility and you have a press brake or some type of production machine, and all it's doing is just sending feedback back on, maybe counts of production or details on what's going on that press brake. It's probably not using much bandwidth at all. It would not even be noticeable on the network. But what happens a lot is, these devices will download large updates or maybe CAD files, or, users are, again, streaming music, maybe from their Alexa device or some, Google Dot or something like that. There's certainly devices that consume a lot more bandwidth, and that could be in the megabits per second or 10 megabits per second, and that's not a lot, compared to what businesses are buying. But it does add up if you have 100 employees in the office and they're all consuming a few megabits per second for a bandwidth to listen to music on their device. Pretty soon you have several hundred megs worth of internet being consumed by people listening to music in the office. So it can consume a lot. And then the other thing is a lot of times updates, firmware updates, do consume a lot of bandwidth. So these could be very large files that are downloaded and can cause network traffic congestion. So those are the things. It's not about the individual device as far as bandwidth, but it's about the cumulative effects of having lots of these devices on the network that can lead to bandwidth issues.
So when it comes to security, a couple of different things, but I was reading about, they call it shadow IoT, and that's when there's a device connected in there that you don't know what it is. You don't know who connected it. And I imagine in the workplace that could be extra hard to monitor, because it could be an employee connecting or a visitor. How do you keep track? How do businesses keep track of this type of thing, and figure out if there's something that shouldn't be there?
We've talked on this podcast before about segregating, for example, guest Wi-Fi networks, because a lot of these IoT devices are mostly connected via Wi-Fi. And so, just like you would segregate your network off for guests coming in, I would also highly recommend having a separate network for these IoT devices, and maybe even more still, internal versus employee IoT devices. So you might have, a Wi-Fi network that your manufacturing IoT devices or your monitoring, your thermostats, things like that are connected to, that you control as an organization. So they're company owned. And then you might have like an employee IoT device that they can connect their smartwatches and, Alexa devices, whatever it may be, when they come into the office, along with their cell phones, if you want to give Wi-Fi access to people's cell phones. And then you don't care as much about that network. You can do bandwidth restrictions and device isolation on that. The only thing that you would really need to worry about is the devices that are connected to your private IoT network. And then with that, you can set up specific restrictions by which device you're connecting to that. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but you would maybe filter by MAC address or the machine address of that device. So when you add one onto the network, you would program that address into the security firewall, and then only the devices that you've allowed in have access. And so you're eliminating that, shadow IoT on the sensitive network. And then for that guest network for, employees, smartwatches and phones and whatever they bring in, you're not quite as concerned, because those devices are not, should leave the building when the employees leave. And then, if you're concerned about security, you can change the passcodes periodically on those, and the employees would have to re-register onto the network and get rid of the shadow IoT devices that exist there.
So you can really narrow down with it. Is that something we as a provider would help businesses do?
For sure. So that's something that we generally do whenever we set up a Wi-Fi network, that we would want to segregate the network depending on device type. This is also important for things like PCI compliance, so that we have like separate, completely segregated networks for your payment card system. Let's say you're in a retail store or restaurant or some place that actually accepts payments. We would need to make sure we segregate your devices that take credit card information off, and then you segregate the guest wireless network, and you'd have maybe 4 or 5 different wireless networks for the different devices to connect to. And then from there, we only give out passwords for those networks, that are public to the employees, and then all the other networks, the IT department would keep those secure and not give those passwords out so people can't connect to them.
And on the on the regular in the side of regular usage, what vulnerabilities do these have? I know I wrote a long time ago about a hack that came in through a smart thermostat that was out on
Yeah,
the network.
I I was was preparing for this podcast, that still kind of floats around, that there was a smart thermostat in a fish tank at a casino in the United States, and the device, maybe it came with some bad code on it, and the hackers were able to get into the network via that smart thermostat. Probably because they didn't have it segregated onto its own network, and so they were able to get maybe to some gaming machines or other devices on the network and infiltrate the network through that smart thermostat. And that's a concern. We've in the United States here, we blocked certain chip manufacturers from being able to sell their products into the United States because they found that these chips were communicating back to China, mostly, are the ones that perpetrated this. And every time you installed one of these devices on the network, you were installing a backdoor to the Chinese government into your network, which is super scary, that you would give access to somebody by just installing a device. I would say some things to watch out for when thinking about these devices is making sure that you're buying devices that are from reputable manufacturers. They're not on any type of banned list from the U.S. government. So the U.S. government holds a list of manufacturers that are banned from selling into the U.S. Um, and you have to be really careful, buying things, online from Amazon. A lot of times, those are directly shipped from China, and they might not go through the same customs inspections that, devices that you would get from maybe a retail store in the US. So I would, highly recommend sticking with manufacturers that are well known, and, not buying any random product off, Amazon or some of these online retailers, because they can certainly have backdoors built into them and chips that may be in the blocked list by the U.S. government. And because they're shipping directly from China to the consumer, they're not going through the same checks that going through a retail store would go through.
And how can you, if you're shopping on Amazon, is there a way to kind of tell? Do you stick with like shipped and sold by Amazon, or how do you tell?
Yeah, I would primarily suggest that, or a retailer in the U.S. And I would also suggest, name brands that we're familiar with here in the U.S. Is important. So, I mean, an example on this is, recently my daughter is building a gaming machine, and she wanted some help putting this machine together, and she, had a list of things that she thought she wanted to buy, and one of them was a webcam, and it was just an off-brand webcam. It was, 20, 30% cheaper than some of the name brands that are out there. And I said, well, I'd rather buy you a name brand because I don't know what this, Gonzu webcam is. And so, we bought a Logitech one for her because I'm, well familiar with that brand. So if you have any questions on these devices, talk to, your IT department, talk to us as Stimulus, and we can help you direct you to, buying name brand products. And these manufacturers go through rigorous testing and ensure that they have reputable chips, and they're not blocked. The manufacturer's not blocked in the United States.
So something like a webcam or other devices that you connect to your laptop, you're not necessarily connecting the webcam directly to your Wi-Fi. What kind of is that a vulnerability still?
It can be. There were attacks that were perpetrated a while ago that USB devices were getting infected with malware. This was back when USB sticks were really popular, and the manufacturers were installing malware, or employees of the manufacturers were getting paid to install malware on those devices before they were shipped out. And so, if you plugged them into your laptop, they would put malware on the person's devices. So anything you plug into your computer, if you have good security mechanisms in place, it's probably not as problematic. But it is, anything connecting to your devices is a concern, whether it's Wi-Fi or your individual computer. So again, buying them from reputable manufacturers, they've gone through good testing, and then have the right amount of security in place. The other thing I'd recommend, especially on these IoT devices, they generally come with a default username and password. Today, most devices make you reset that password right away. But if they don't, you make sure you put in a new username and password that with complex passwords in there, because that's another thing that happens, especially if these devices are connected directly to the internet, which you really should never do. Never connect them to a public IP address. But a lot of times, what people will do is they'll buy like a DVR, like a surveillance camera system, put it on the network, and then the owner of the company wants to watch the DVR from home or from wherever they're at, and they'll have us open up a firewall port to that device. Now you have a direct access to that DVR remotely, and a potential vulnerability. So if there's default usernames and passwords, a hacker can just be searching the internet for these devices that are available, see that it's this type of DVR, and use a set of default usernames and passwords and potentially get into your system that way. So that's a very common way to get into a network, is by using these default usernames and passwords. So anything you get, make sure you reset the passwords right away to something complex. And I would highly recommend not connecting these directly to the internet. Use some type of VPN to get access into the network, because these devices tend to have a lot of vulnerabilities in them in general. They don't have the same security mechanisms in place that we would recommend for any device connected to the internet.
And so what kind of data might some of these devices be gathering? I actually just recently won a little desk smart robot thing, and my phone connects to it. You put the phone in the and it through an app, and then it can take pictures, and it will just take a picture on its own. And I started wondering, like, who sees this, and who sees these conversations? So what kind of things should we be thinking about with that kind of thing?
Well, I would recommend reading the privacy policy, the 80,000 page document. Or maybe you take the privacy policy and throw it into your favorite AI tool and ask it read through it and give you the synopsis on what privacy there is. Again, if it's sold by a reputable manufacturer in the US, there are standard privacy laws, and safeguards that they have to put in place. So, things like in Europe, GDPR, or if it's sold in California, there's a California data privacy laws. There's definitely a lot of regulations that govern the privacy of information they have. And so quick searches on those privacy policies would be to see if they comply with some of these tighter regulations, like FTC guidelines, GDPR, CPRA in California. And if they do, then there should be some confidence that they've gone through some rigorous testing and they're keeping your data confidential. If they don't, then maybe not use them, because that is a concern. And it's certainly, there's been from like the Alexa devices or Apple's devices with Siri, there has been some analysis that some of that information that's listening for is getting sent to people that are analyzing that voice and doing, people are the AI, and that's always a concern is, are they sharing that information with their employees? And I certainly don't want pictures of me sitting at my desk or um, my voice being listened to and sent to some Apple or Amazon employee in the Philippines or in India or China. That I don't know. I just don't. I personally don't like it, and I don't have one of those devices. And I've been into some hotel rooms and things that have those devices sitting on the desk, and the first thing I do is unplug them, because it's just a very big concern about devices listening to everything I say. When I get a new phone, or if I have a new phone, I turn off the listening immediately. I don't want it listening to me all the time. Even if it does have these privacy laws in place, there have been abuses by these large companies, even of these privacy laws, and they've been fined. They've been dealt some big fines on them, but I prefer not to be part of one of those fines.
Yeah, because it still happened.
It still happened. I mean, my data got out. So, I mean, I'm not saying anything, that I guess I don't care about, but I do care, that they're doing it. It just feels like an invasion of privacy. Like I don't want somebody standing in my room all the time listening to things I have to say. Except when I'm on the podcast, I don't mind. I want you guys to listen to what I'm saying
Yeah.
on the podcast.
To choose, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so segueing into, what do you find are kind of some of the most helpful of these types of devices for businesses?
I think from a business standpoint, if you're in again, like environmental monitoring, it's really cool that you can send these sensors out. Groundwater detection. Lots of things that give a lot more detail and communication back to the engineers or to construction teams. Manufacturing is really good. These devices that monitor equipment and report back deficiencies or errors. That's great. And I think in medical too, the IoT devices of all these sensors being connected into a hospital and even in physician systems is wonderful. So there's certainly a huge opportunity for businesses to use these more and more. And it's amazing, these devices are getting smaller and smaller, and can be put in anywhere into a lot of different things. So innovations are coming up quite a bit. The other thing, that I would say too is, like, if you're looking at inventory management, that's another one that came to mind, is analyzing inventory, keeping track of large assets and the movement of those. So there's just a ton of opportunities out there for businesses to create these smart environments that give a lot of predictive analysis and allow businesses to make better decisions with this information.
And what do you think? How does AI play more of a role in these devices these days?
Well, I think AI is reducing the amount of electronics, custom programming that they have to do to get these devices to work. And then these devices can produce a lot of information. And so, on the back end, using AI to analyze the data and provide analysis and insights into what's happening. So, analysis of maybe predictive failure of machinery or predictive analysis of, um, you know, maybe ordering of assets that you need or healthcare outcomes, predictive monitoring of that. So I think the more AI on the receiving all this data and then analyzing it and providing summaries of things that we could use them for is where AI is really coming into play. And I think we're going to see more and more of that over the next couple of years. That AI is really great at consuming a lot of information and then analyzing it very quickly and then producing good outcomes and ideas and results from that consumption of information.
All right. Well, any final thoughts or tips you have for business owners who are looking at all the things that we connect to and use in business?
I just go back to the security side of things. Just make sure you think about that. Don't just buy the coolest new smart thermostat connected to your office network and have your fish tank hacked and the rest of your network. So security is paramount in this. And then in our personal lives, just find ways to have fun with it too. But maybe keep the privacy side of things in mind. You asked me a question I didn't answer at the beginning. What's my favorite IoT device? And I am a triathlete, and one of the things that I have is a watch that helps me with my training. So it's my wife laughs at me because she doesn't include the technology in all her training, but I do. I look at everything, and so heart rate monitor that connects to my watch, and then as soon as I'm done with my workouts, it uploads the workout information. And I have music stored on my watch, so Bluetooth listen to music, and it's always keeping that up to date with the latest streaming music that I have out there. So it's probably my favorite gadget is my Garmin smartwatch that I really enjoy. So there's the answer to that.
It wasn't the refrigerator.
It wasn't the refrigerator. I will not connect that to Wi-Fi. I don't need my refrigerator telling me that there's more ice cubes available.
Yeah. Because it could be useful if there's something wrong with the temperature. But,
maybe that would be.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you, Sherry, and we'll talk to you next time.